Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Steve Walker, and I am the proud Executive Director of the Washington State Housing Finance Commission. We're excited that you all could join us today for our second coffee talk with the 2023 Friend of Housing Awardees. Today, we will have conversation and learn from Michael Brown and Marty Koistra, from the Black Home Initiative. Michael is the chief architect of Civic Commons, which is the convener of the Black Home Initiative Network. First off, welcome, Michael, and welcome, Marty. We recognized BHI and 8 other individuals and organizations at our Friend of Housing Awards roughly 3 weeks ago. In some ways, it seems like it was yesterday. In some ways, it seems like it was a year ago. But at our annual Housing Washington conference, this time held in Tacoma. But we also wanted to gather folks virtually to meet and learn from the expertise and the passion of our award winners, in this case, Michael and Marty. So here we are. As we go along, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. Actually, put them in the Q&A. As opposed to the chat, and we will do our best to get to all of those questions. Our intention here is to just have a good informal discussion with our BHI friends. Also here is Bob Peterson, who is the Deputy Director here at the Housing Finance Commission. And Bob and I are going to tag team the conversation today with Michael and with Marty. Marty, you're free to chime in wherever you want. A little bit about the Black Home Initiative, the winner of our Racial Equity Initiative Award. BHI is an influential initiative comprised of over 78 partner organizations. BHI aims to empower 1,500 new Black households to own homes within 5 years in key Washington geographies. BHI tackles housing supply, buyer readiness, and systemic change. The BHI policy group also played a pivotal role in passing the historic Covenant Home Ownership Act, which we will have an opportunity to talk about today as well, creating new avenues for addressing housing discrimination. And so with those brief introductions, I'm going to kick it to you, Bob, to get us going.
Thank you, Steve. As you indicated, Michael is the chief architect of Civic Commons, which is a part of the Seattle Foundation. So Michael, could you start by telling us how BHI was created, and then a little bit more about the structure and leadership of BHI?
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Pleasure to be here. And I'm definitely going to weave Marty into some of our conversation. So it was just about 2+ years ago, that Civic Commons we were approached by a national intermediary, the Center for Community Investment. And they were really interested in doing work in Seattle, but in 5 other cities across the country, looking for a convening partner who could bring together a cross-sector community partnership to address some issue related to housing inequity in that region. So they weren't determining what that issue was. It was left to the region to identify what the issue would be related to addressing some housing inequity. But they were looking for someone who could work with various partners across sectors and with community to help identify that issue and then align strategies to drive change, systemic change associated with it. So we said yes to that. And based on relationships that I had with people like Marty and Doris Koo and Sue Tayuk and a number of others, what came into clarity was a lot of work happening around Black home ownership. And a lot of this was seeded by work that was occurring around the same time in terms of building a 7-point plan to increase Black home ownership. So it's a great opportunity to mesh those efforts together, work that was being done to identify strategies and approaches to advance homeownership for Black Washingtonians, and at the same time, fueled with resources from the center and JP Morgan Chase, who's a key partner, to build a new table focused on Black homeownership, predominantly in the Puget Sound region. And then, Marty, do you want to chime in?
Well, thanks, Michael and Bob, the rest of the team. Yeah, just to add a couple of points. I mean, Michael hit on it really closely. One of the things that when we looked at what were kind of the big adaptive challenges that we would need to face in doing this work, we noted a couple of things. One was there were less resources in the homeownership space than there is in the multifamily rental space. I think we all understand why that is. The low-income housing tax credit became a huge fueling mechanism for creating local networks across sectors in order to produce rental housing at scale. We don't have that same kind of incentive mechanism to create networks on the homeownership space. And so Michael and I, for many years, have been talking about kind of the fragmentation in the ecosystem. And really what BHI is about is not just that shared priority of bringing about that number of Black buyers. We hope it goes far beyond that, but to really get alignment in the ecosystem. And so the structure, Bob, that we're deploying is a network. It's not an organization. And it's really about trying to bring all the parties across the sectors into a space to be magnetized by that shared priority. And we hope that in so doing, we not only help this population and this geography, but we create an enabling environment that can be used across populations and across the state of Washington.
Excellent. So you indicate BHI's stated goal is to create opportunity for 1,500 new and low moderate income Black households to own a home in areas of South Seattle, South King County, and North Pierce County within the next 5 years. That's a pretty big goal. Could you talk about the BHI's approach to reaching these goals?
Yeah, and I'm going to pick up where Marty left off. And those of us who are in, be it housing development work or community development work or anything related to true community change, systemic change, we recognize that not one organization, not one sector on its own will be able to solve that problem. We can do our best to address outputs, but fundamentally transforming an outcome is going to require a whole set of partners working together in new ways. So right from the onset, one of the things we were super clear about was that this had to be a network effect, that we had to build a true cross-sector community network in service to advancing that goal. So to be clear, Civic Commons, Michael and Marty did not identify that 1,500 goal. What we did, we had a ton of knowledge and a ton of research, but we brought together the experts and community folks and financial institutions and the public sector and other partners working together to build relationship with each other, but to work from the data that we had and work that they were doing on the ground to then have that network identify what the goal could be, what was possible. And part of that process, Bob, kind of ensured that folks had skin in the game. There was true ownership. So Habitat in both King and Pierce can contribute to that goal. Homestead can, Homesite and Urban League and Africatown. Everyone plays a part in contributing to that overarching goal, and that we're moving that thing together. So that enabling environment that Marty mentioned, that care in terms of building relationship and partnership in service to that shared priority is where we at Civic Commons spent a lot of time. And then, and Marty, you can address some other aspects of this, but then identifying pain points or opportunities to hit that goal, and creating work groups that could work together, identify the approaches and strategies to get to that particular thing, be it construction financing or pre-development work or buyer ID. That's how we were advancing and continue to advance the work of the network towards a shared priority.
So that's part of your detailed plan for these areas. So I take it upon that you folks looked at existing partners already in the marketplace and their unique specificities to do this and create this so-called goal. So how does it work when you try to get them all together in a room?
Marty, how about you take that one first?
Well, we're not going to, we'll be candid in this conversation, right? I mean, we in this region, you know, are innovative. We say we work together really well, and you know, we are collaborators. But in many respects, when you have organizations, especially that rely on scarce resources, or at least what are perceived scarce resources, we tend to be competitors first, right? And so it's really about, as Michael said, you know, convening the people is one thing. Cultivating an environment of trust, though, is really the next step and the hard work. And you can imagine partners coming into an environment, you know, wondering through surveillance, you know, how is my organization going to benefit from this? How does this all work? And this is just a natural part of the evolution of changing the way we think about going about things strategically. To Michael's point, once you know, can agree on clarifying your purpose and your shared priority, and you do that convening and you cultivate trust, then the next thing is, how do we coordinate existing actions? We got a lot of folks out there on the ground doing stuff that most people don't even know about. We are yet to catalog all the special purpose credit programs that various financial institutions are putting into place. You know, so just getting our arms around all the coordinated actions that are already happening. What are people trying? What are they doing? We got our friends at WSECU, for example, who are doing cohorts in the basement of Black churches with potential Black buyers. There's all this kind of stuff. And then to Michael's point, Bob, we started to take those challenge areas, those adaptive pieces, some of them technical, but mostly adaptive, and work on co-creating then through these project teams resolution to those issues. How do we get construction financing and pre-development funds that are not fraught with the traditional ways of allocating resources? You need a big balance sheet. You need to be a developer of proven track record. Oh, and by the way, do home ownership. Well, this is an area where we decided we needed our own pre-development fund. And so those are the examples of how we've started to, you know, really address what needs to change in order for that 1,500 goal to be exceeded and move beyond.
And maybe the one thing I would just add to what Marty said, and tethers back to your question, Bob. Walking into this, one of the things we knew is that we had, we're very fortunate in this region, in this state, to have really strong organizations, partners across sectors, you know, doing work, and the alignment of values was not a question, you know. So those who are working in the home ownership space know the importance of home ownership and what it means for an individual and a family, but then also the recognition that racial inequities exist in the affordable housing space and in the home ownership space based on all sorts of things that we know. So the alignment of values around supporting home ownership for low moderate income Black households as a way of bumping that home ownership rate, but also as a way of helping those families and households build assets that long term will help address some aspect of the racial wealth gap. That, to some extent, that was kind of the easy part. The harder part is as Marty mentioned, are the adaptive things that come into play. There are not enough or haven't been enough resources to support the capacity building that needs to exist for many of our nonprofit partners. The relationships at times with some of our financial institution partners and those housing partners, can be a little challenged. So creating space for authentic partnerships to be built, the bringing in new voices and new players into the space, and once again, as Marty mentioned, the trust building that has to go into it. Those are things you can't ignore. You have to address them, and I think part of the beauty of the network is folks are oriented towards the values, are oriented towards the priorities, and they're willing to work together in different ways in trying to bridge some of the maybe fractured relationships across sectors and sometimes within a particular sector in order to get to that shared priority.
Let's segue here, talk about some of BHI's wins so far, and there have been many wins you folks have put together. Let's take the area of growing the pool of homes for purchase and conflating that with how to prepare home buyers. What are you doing in those areas, and how are your successes being seen on the ground?
Marty, you want to take that one?
Sure, thanks, Michael. So what we've done on the supply side, Bob, is started by at least getting our arms around what kind of product pipeline exists in terms of what we know from our partners. We've got a spreadsheet of roughly 1,374 potential homeownership homes that are somehow either conceived of, the property's been purchased, or underway. If we speculate that roughly half of those could be available for Black home buyers, you can see the potential. But more importantly, we have begun to really support a group of Black for-profit developers in Tacoma who want to expand their portfolio of work into homeownership. We've created this Field Order 15 fund, which will be housed at home site, which is intentionally providing pre-development funding at a very low cost with some grants, some low interest loans, specifically for developers of color to be able to produce housing, homeownership homes, and really taking a hard look at the construction financing side. And so this is the next big play on the chessboard, is getting access to low cost, low barrier financing for developers to be able to produce at scale. What we're really trying to do is help people see that in this market, homeownership's not going to look like, as we know, that single family detached home on a large lot. In many cases, what we're going to be looking at are limited equity co-ops, condo buildings, and really also trying to push the envelope on thinking about how we get homeownership around all high capacity transit. We've done a fairly good job through Sound Transit 3 and other programs to get multifamily rental projects, but why can't we have multifamily homeownership projects? And so then you run into the barriers, like our Olu project that Homesite's been trying to get off the ground for a long time at Othello. That building looks just like a multifamily rental building, but does provide a rung on the ladder for folks to start their homeownership journey as a limited equity co-op. So those are all the things on the supply side that we're really trying to push through. and encourage the nonprofits to think about joint ventures with the for-profit developers.
Yeah.
Normally we think scale comes from adding more staff internally, and how can we leverage all of our capacity across the spectrum to get really serious about putting more product on the ground.
Well, the third focus area is improving collaboration among our public, our private, our nonprofit organizations, which you ran for quite so many years. What do you see as successes in that area?
I'm smiling a bit, Bob, because Marty and I, for myself, I've been a grant maker. I've been in the world of philanthropy for a long time, and recognizing the interesting components of power, in particular when you control resources, and how that kind of shapes partnerships. But also working to disrupt that, because that I never felt that it got us really to the place that we wanted to get. So the network approach and truly this co-creation, co-design approach is something I firmly believe in. It's the work of Civic Commons. Marty, in all of his experience as a network weaver, believes in it. So it's something that we don't take lightly. It's a very serious thing that we want to deploy, because it's what we believe to be true, but it's how this work will outlast the role that Civic Commons plays as a convener and a facilitator. So once again, we're very fortunate to have strong relationships with the public sector, the Housing Finance Commission, the City of Tacoma, the City of Seattle, with other partners. We have great relationships with philanthropy, great relationships with our nonprofit friends, and then we weave in for-profit developers, faith-based institutions, et cetera. So there's been some intentionality in terms of creating the space where people can do that work with each other. Would we say everything goes swimmingly well? Of course not. I mean, the messy part of doing any of this work is that we as human beings are complex and complicated. But the thing that we continue to anchor folks around is that shared priority. So from that standpoint, we've seen more hands in terms of the willingness to work together, because I think folks see the other side. They see not just the benefit to their organization, but the benefit to the network, and most importantly, the benefit to the end user. So the time that we spend in terms of, sometimes we just have to have conversations with philanthropy separately. We have to have conversations with the public sector separately, but then kind of bringing that thing back in together. So then we're moving some things. So a quick example, because of the resources that we've been able to attract through the start of this initiative with the Center for Community Investment and JP Morgan Chase, there were some things we could do, and there were some limitations that were, just as a result of funding, we couldn't do. Some of that had to do with policy work and advocacy. But we knew that while we could produce all the housing that we could address the supply piece or prep prospective home buyers on the demand side, in order to get to the systemic change, policy work was going to be necessary. And that's where we could leverage and engaging in partnership with philanthropy, in particular with the Seattle Foundation, to make an investment in one of our core partners, the Housing Development Consortium, to help catalyze the BHI policy group. And one, it was a great illustration of partnership, but also how we want this network to operate. There are times we don't have to be in the middle of it. What we actually want are for our partners to be talking with each other and moving things once again under the broad umbrella of BHI. But just even early on, having that type of relationship create the type of catalytic approach and activity is how we feel that, this cross-sector community partnership, can really move things along the way.
All right, I'm gonna jump in here. And I want to just appreciate each of you. I love hearing the story and all of the blood, the sweat, and the tears that represent the BHI's work. And I'd like to maybe dive specifically into one of the focus conversations of the BHI, which is around the Covenant Home Ownership Act, and ask if you could roll back the tape a little bit and share with us BHI's experience with that. A big a big body of work. I'm not going to call it a win. It's a work in progress, but it's a huge step forward in passing that act. And if you could just share a little bit about how BHI helped to develop the bill and gain support for its passage.
Or you want to kick that one off?
Sure. Well, obviously, we have to be really clear in the very beginning about the origin spirit of that bill, which came from Representative Taylor and former Speaker Frank Chop. And it's one of those interesting propitious things, right? Because when we mapped out the 7-point plan, and one of the 7 areas of that 7-point plan is the whole policy regime, right? And when you listen to Michael talk, again, to see this live beyond that 1500 means that we have to go after the systems level issues, right? And I think that that's probably the most difficult part of this work, is that it's not just saying we're starting here today, Steve, and we're going to just start building homes and loaning money to Black buyers. We've got so much history to overcome, and so much that we have done that makes that nearly impossible, because you've got 4 out of 10 Washingtonians who are Black who have 0 net worth, right? So they're never going to be able to pass on to the next generation that capability of a down payment. And so seeing the Covenant's homeownership account come to life is a representation not only of addressing that huge gap in wealth and asset capability to start creating that cycle for Black households, but it is a huge policy acknowledgement of past wrongs and things that we are now going to try to remedy to do the work that needs to be done going forward. And so BHI, I think one thing that we need to acknowledge is that in order to get something like CHA done, one and done, which is unusual, as we all know, for policy at the state level, and to have the support of as many players, diverse players as we did. Let's just be really clear.
Mm-hmm.
You know this, Steve. The document recording fee, that's a sacred cow for the advocate community, right? The banks dislike the document recording fee, and realtors actually hate it. And yet, when we were mapping this all out, our hope and our aspiration was that those 3 parties would at least stay neutral and not go against us. And instead, they stood up beside us and testified in favor. So this tells us a couple of things. Not only do we have an acknowledgement, I think, of our broader society that we need to do something, but that this moment in time is pretty precious, and we mustn't let it go past us, where we have a new sense of awareness of what needs to really change. And so this is the big boost for BHI in reality, because of the downturn or the change in the economic situation, the rise in house prices and the rise in interest rates. only complicates our shared priority. BHI is a remedy that, CHA is a remedy that essentially is a gift for the success of BHI.
Yeah. If I might, just for our listeners that maybe aren't as familiar with some of the details of the Covenant Home Ownership Act, could one of you share a little bit about the key policy actions and the actual changes that the Covenant Act positions us all to see address the disparities in home ownership?
Yeah, Michael, I can kick this off. Essentially what happens is the act enables the collection of resources from the document recording fee and pools those resources and makes them available to the Finance Commission as a special purpose credit program. And just to unpack that briefly, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act has allowed for special purpose credit programs for decades. The Habitat for Humanity affiliates that for many years loaned money, they self-performed their lending. They did that as a special purpose credit program enabled under the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. So we will see then an increase, significant amount of down payment assistance and possibly closing costs made available to households who were negatively impacted by restrictive covenants that the state allowed to happen for many, many decades. And of course, behind the curtain, the state could have faced the threat of being sued for allowing those practices to happen. So the Covenant's home ownership account counteracts that. What this means in reality is that those households who didn't have the chance to earn those assets, and let's be really clear, the recent study done by our friends at Eco Northwest for the King County Wastewater Division, and some work that Michael and I and the help of some consultants who don't want to be named did, shows a range of between $300,000 and $500,000 in potential lost wealth for households that weren't able to buy a home in 1976 in Seattle compared to a household that was, right?
Yeah.
So this is a game changer in terms of making those resources available and getting homeownership as a real opportunity for those households who've been shut out from it. And let me just say this, Michael and I and the core team of leaders are not naive enough to think that homeownership is the only way to create intergenerational wealth. And in some cases, it doesn't pan out. We get that. But it is the lane we've chosen to work in.
Right. Right.
Well, Michael and Marty, you both talked about the past, what you've done in the past, and we're at the present. And BHI's impact has been very substantial. But what does your number plan to focus on in this next year, 2024? What's the number one thing you want to work on?
So Marty, I'll take this one, but chime in. And Marty and I are typically aligned, but this might be an interesting question. So as I look at 24 and what we've done this past year, so the passage of CHA, but then we've launched our Black Home Ownership Legacy Fund at the Greater Tacoma Community Foundation, which is a capacity building fund. Very soon, we're going to, actually this month or the early part of next month, the Field Order 15 Fund, which is our pre-development fund. We have work underway around a debt support fund, and hopefully we'll be moving that construction financing fund forward. So if I think about the tools that we're actually putting into place to support both the supply and the demand side, one of the tasks that I see, and one of the things, top priority for me, is get those firmly set up and continue to support fundraising for those efforts, because once again, there's great need in terms of within the network and network partners to have access to those tools. So I want to make sure that that's available. Alongside, and it's not just one, so there I got two, but alongside, like, once again, where are those pain points that we know within the system, that be it through policy and or some other type of organizing action that the network can lean in on and help disrupt or move that barrier out of the way. So for me, it's fundraising in 24 for the things that we planted into the ground, and then also supporting some additional policy work. Marty, anything you would add?
I think you pretty well nailed it, Michael. I mean, to get the flywheel, to use an old analogy, turning more aggressively, we want to see more of the network partners leaning in. They need some wins, so we'll be counting and celebrating Black home buyers across the spectrum, deepening partnerships in places, especially around the buyer outreach. We've got a lot of effort trying to draw people into the space of getting the support they need relationally to make the journeys. We're really trying to get away from Black households coming off the street and walking into a lending office of any type and begging for an application and then getting that adverse action letter, because it only sends people away saying, I've been rejected. We want people to get the homeownership counseling support, whatever debt support, income support, whatever they need before they fill out that application, so that we're encouraging people and really moving a strong pipeline of buyers into play, and seeing the energy that comes from that.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, that's excellent. Let's
Go ahead.
look a little further. One more part, Steve, right here. That's 2024. That's a lot to do in 2024. So could you share some future plans or initiatives you might want to bring with BHI as it continues its mission?
So I mean, that's an interesting question, Bob. And what I'll say, for me, that's dependent on the network and where the network wants to go. It's an interest. It's interesting for Civic Commons, because once again, we're not a housing developer. In some regards, we're process consultants, and we serve as a convener and a facilitator of the network. Marty's heard this, but honestly, all network members have heard this as well. For me, leading Civic Commons, one of the things I think about a lot is, what is our exit strategy? The intent wasn't to do empire building for Civic Commons. It was to help launch this network. So as I think about that and starting to minimize the role of Civic Commons as that convener, how does the network hold and continue to carry forth the shared priority and the activities associated with it? So, it's not a hide the cookie answer, but essentially for me, kind of thinking in 25 and 26, a lot of it's going to depend on what the network wants. Where are those opportunities? If we've landed these funds, great. Is there more work to be done? Are there new policy areas? Maybe. But how does the network start to truly own and then drive what the network wants to do? Civic Commons will still be involved as a partner, but hopefully more behind the scenes versus the role that we've been playing. So that's it's not the most definite answer, but it's kind of how I view this path forward over the next few years.
Great. I'm gonna remind our viewing and listening audience that they have an opportunity to ask questions, and they can put that in the Q&A, and we will get to those. But maybe one last reflection from each of you about how people can get both support and get involved in the BHI? What does that look and feel like?
Mm-hmm. You want to start, Mr. Kustra?
Yeah, I mean, the BHI website, and we can put the address in the chat, offers a lot of ports of entry for folks, ways to engage. Right now, as Michael said, the emphasis is on all these project teams. So there's 3 working in the area of supply. There's 3 teams working in the area of buyer ID and support. And then there's the whole communications and narrative shift group, and then ultimately the campaign group. So there's places for folks to plug into those project teams, like the staff of the Finance Commission have done, and really offer their expertise. And it's the whole idea here is, how do you get as many people grabbing a hold of the shovel as possible? It's not about Civic Commons creating a 35 staffed organization trying to do this beast. It's going to happen because people in the partner organizations are all picking up a piece. And for some, it's picking up a piece of what they do every day and doing more of it. For others, it's doing that plus engaging on the co-creation side of it to overcome the challenges and the issues. And of course, getting signed up to be part of that policy network.
Yeah.
There's plenty of places, whether it be federal policy, state policy, or local policy, where every jurisdiction's working on their housing elements and their comp plans right now. That's the place to show up. Bring your voice to the table. Let people know that homeownership is important, that it's got to be a key part of the spectrum. We never want to pit it against chronic adult homelessness and multifamily rental, but it has got to be part of the equation if we're going to make the promise of what it means to achieve livelihood real for Black households.
Yeah. And Steve, the only thing I would add to what Marty said, I mean, I think that, those are very tangible ways for more folks to get involved. But what I'm about to say is maybe more of a challenge for us all. One of the things that we have told ourselves at the very beginning and continue to tell ourselves is that BHI in and of itself will not solve the racial wealth gap. We want to stay in our lane as it relates to how are we addressing the barriers that have been in the way in terms of increasing Black home ownership. So that's our task, but we would be foolish not to recognize the other things that are important to addressing the racial wealth gap. In this vein, I'm going to want to push us all to think about community development in its broadest form. So part of the experience that we all have as homeowners, we make choices in terms of the neighborhoods that we move to. It's the quality of the schools, what are some of the commercial amenities associated, services associated, parks and open space. And for me, this approach to community development can't be taken lightly. And we're very good at siloing various things and just kind of looking at this one aspect and this one aspect and this one aspect. And we got to figure out how to bridge those silos, because what we don't want to create are kind of these wonderful, incredible homeownership opportunities, for. And right now, the conversation is around Black, low, moderate income households. But we also know that if we get it right for those furthest from opportunity, everyone's going to ride that wave up. But fundamentally, we still need to do the work to build healthy, thriving communities that work for everyone. So where are those homeownership opportunities? And then how are we working with others to support some of the other amenities that are essential to creating those healthy, thriving neighborhoods and communities?
Excellent. Thank you. As I and monitoring questions coming in. There's interest in getting a little personal here and maybe asking each of you if you could share a personal experience or story that really illustrates the transformative power of homeownership for Black individuals and families.
Sure. I mean, I'll take that I'll first I'll go first. So this is actually one of the questions that we've asked core team members, because then once again it anchors us in this work. And you know, I grew up in New Orleans, and my folks, you know, were homeowners. My grandparents were homeowners, but they, of course, were redlined, and the only property they could purchase was in a you know, Black neighborhood, segregated, no amenities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, but as a kid, of course, you know, it's like you don't know all that story. You just know that you have this place that's home. So then becoming a homeowner myself, or the benefits of my folks having a home, um, they weren't able to contribute necessarily to my purchase, because, you know, like the value of their home, you know, was something, but it, you know, it wasn't a lot. But the more I became aware of the racially restrictive covenants and the redlining, it for me kind of doubled down for my approach in philanthropy as a grant maker to work to, you know, once again disrupt those systems, so that you know, my kid isn't going to have those challenges, or, you know, frankly, any kid who looks like my kid won't have those challenges. So I think for me, there's definitely a generational component and a recognition of how those things inhibited asset building and wealth creation for my family. While my generation might look a little different, you know, once again, like how do we or me as a parent ensure those things aren't also in place for my kid?
Right. Thank you. Thank you. Marty, do you want to respond to that question, or there's another one here I can throw at you.
Happy to just share briefly. You know, I spent 24 years of my life doing Habitat for Humanity work. And before that, I was involved with a group called Justice for All, and spent a lot of time taking college students and adults deep into Mississippi. And, you know, one of the most profound early experiences with that was in a place called Mendenhall, Mississippi, which is the Simpson County seat. It's south of Jackson. When we were there in the 80s, the Klan was still marching down Main Street, and the Black and white segregation was clear, divided by the railroad tracks in the community. There was no dollars exchanged, no economic activity on the Black side of the tracks. And so one of the things I got involved in at a very early age was helping start a credit union on the Black side of the tracks to create some movement, economic movement, to make it possible for those households to see some level of livelihood. And we saw that persistently throughout all of the experience, and living in the Deep South in America's Georgia, where the segregation, you know, when the realtor showed me, first met with me when I moved to America, she says, "I'll take you over to the place where most of the Habitat folks are buying their homes." And I said, "No, that's okay. I'll go to the other neighborhood." You know, there's so much history, and there's so much to learn, but the power of owning a home is really amazing. My daughter and son-in-law are not Black. They live in Omaha. They moved from renting into a limited equity co-op in 2020. They both work as nurses in a hospital, by the way, and they bought a house, and the property taxes went up so much during the pandemic that they're back in the limited equity co-op again. That is what's possible for them with their student loans, but it is still home ownership. And so this whole thing is very real. Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you each for sharing those personal stories. I think the last question I'll pick off here is, and it's exciting. I mean, we've heard disrupt and advocacy and policy and sort of the systems level effort. And focusing on that one, could you each reflect a little bit on what are the key principles that you think are most crucial for making lasting change in housing and communities, and how they guide that next generation of housing professionals? Got to grow that bench.
It's a great question, as Marty and I are both kind of, thinking, how we want to respond to that one. So, I mean, Marty's heard this a lot. I mean, I do have this philosophy that leads the work that we do at Civic Commons. Our fundamental belief is that in order to get to the transformational, you need to build the relational and experience the transactional together. And what I've based on my work and what I've seen over a 3-decade period is that we say that we're after the outcome, but we're actually after the output, and we've become comfortable with the output, and we don't value the relationships as much as a transaction, because building relationships and trust is really hard. And it takes time, but because of the urgency of the issues that we are facing, we want to get to the problem. And unfortunately, what's my point of view is that it's why we haven't solved anything. We don't have the muscle necessary. So not everyone's a fan of it, but once again, this approach of co-creation and co-design and allowing people to come in wherever they're at. I don't need, as long as the value is shared, or even if you're close enough to the value, I want to bring you in, and let's do that dirty work of building a relationship, because if we do that and we build the trust, we then create the space for the type of dialogue and conversation that will be fraught, and it should be, and it's okay, but might accelerate us a little faster towards actually solving things. So as I think through that, and I think through kind of the new folks coming into the field, be it in housing or community development or education or public service, it really doesn't matter. This piece of engaging with those who have lived knowledge is really important. Understanding that relationships really do matter. And then fundamentally, it is, if you want to, well, I'll say it a different way. If you really want to help the end user, how do you let go of, the need to win, or, to claim success for your organization and or your governmental entity, and put some things aside in service to the things that do need to be done in order to get to that outcome.
Yeah. Marty, you want to add anything?
Pretty hard to build on that. I mean, I just say simply, hey, mission, not organization, humility, not brand, trust, not control, and constellations, not stars.
Good stuff.
Mm.
Good stuff, Marty. Hey, we are running short on time now. I want to maybe start to wrap us up and give you each a minute or so to just think about, what would you like our audience to walk away with today? What are some of your last thoughts? Michael, go ahead.
So what I think there are two, Steve. One, we're really appreciative of the recognition by the Housing Finance Commission on the Racial Equity Award. And I think the thing I would leave with the audience is, it is possible to do this work. I mean, we're not I wouldn't say we're inventing anything new. I think we're, there have been great models around how you build partnerships or networks in order to move things. But I think the steadfast commitment is what's needed. So so I think what I want folks to know that this solving these really complex issues can be done. I'm not saying we're there, but I think we're on our way. But creating the space once again for those partnerships to come into fruition and grow and be nurtured, is something that don't shrink away from it. But the second thing, and it's kind of a funny thing to say, but boldness. And thankfully, a lot of this work was seeded through some existing work as they were building the 7-point plan. But even with the goal of the network, 1,500 new low moderate Black home owners over the next 5 years. And here's what I'm going to say, really about that. There are some folks who will who are quantitatively focused and will bean count. It's like you didn't get to 1,500 over that 5-year period, you failed. Versus, if we get to 1,000 over a 5-year period, I'm going to be ecstatic, because that means that the network's working, because there are all sorts of things that will go into it. So my point is, be bold, push the envelope. I will say, when the network came up with 1,500, I took a breath and okay, but if that's what you believe, let's go for it. And but because of that, something that it's a little, out of reach but ambitious, that's super cool. So be bold in trying to do what you're trying to do and build a network, and be thoughtful in terms of how you do that.
Excellent. Thank you. Marty, you want to last thoughts on what you want people to walk away with about the BHI?
Well, I think, it's exemplary of what work we all need to do internally and work we need to do in our organizations. And to Michael's point, don't be afraid of having those challenging conversations within your organizations or with your friends.
Yeah.
I mean, we're finding a lot of people who didn't understand restrictive covenants because of CHA. And we're finding a lot of people who now do understand, but say, well, that was so then, this is so now, what's the big deal? And they still don't comprehend it. We have a lot of work to do to really help all of us take advantage of this propitious moment in time. Personally, I don't know that we're going to get another moment like the one we have right now. Let's not waste it.
Thank you for that. I'm going to turn it back to Bob, but to just close us out, I want to raise my coffee cup to you guys. I know that you represent a powerful network, and it's exciting to be a part of it. I just want to say that it's exciting, and it was an easy decision to acknowledge the BHI and all of the collective work as one of our Friend of Housing Award winners this year. But just on a personal level, I just want to appreciate each of you. And I'll turn it over to Bob.
Thanks, Steve. And my key takeaway are some phrases you gave us today. Trust, not control. Thank you, Marty. And for Michael, lived knowledge, what we've lived. That's what we have to give to the other people as we go forward. And I'll end with Marty's great comment. I think that's going to be important because, Michael, you hit on it multiple times. Constellation of stars. We need a bunch of stars out there to light the world up to make this change. No one group or entity is going to make it happen, but a constellation of stars. So thank you to our Friend of Housing, our Black Home Initiative represented by Michael Brown and Marty Koistra. Great presentation, gentlemen. And thanks to all of you in the audience. Hope you take away some wisdom and inspiration from your own work. And I take a lot away myself. So today's session can also be seen online soon. We'll be posting it up there. We hope that you share it with those who were not able to join us. And thank you all for being here. Please be well in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Bob. Good, Steve.
Be well.